All right, everybody, let's get started into This is the Year, the Swiss Artificial Intelligence podcast, where we deconstruct all things AI that happened in the last week. But particularly in this episode, we're also looking ahead in the future, especially if you're implementing AI solutions into your own business or into clients, you would want to have two things generally under control. First, the costs and also the metrics in terms of quality of your delivery. Today, as always, I'm joined by two gentlemen. Let me introduce the first one that just told me he's probably been working over the weekend because of a very large Swiss AI project that's soon going into production. Bene, the AI magician. How is it going?
I'm going great. I didn't work this weekend. It wasn't me. It was other people. I just worked during the week.
Okay, you told me on Friday you potentially will work. Okay, that's true.
Yeah. I was working until no worries. I did work a bit late during the week, but at the weekend I just wanted to chill and rest because AI does itself and we're already doing a lot.
Okay, good elevator pitch, Bene. Let me introduce the second guest of today, the AI wizard. Maybe you worked on the weekend, probably also not. Joao, how is it going from your end?
On my end, everything was done by Thursday because I'm just that good. Bene just took a few extra days to get set up, but we got there.
As far as I remember, there was some blocker on Friday when we had a sync.
So. Exactly. There was like a block. It appeared Thursday evening. I was like, okay, I managed to solve it, but
that was past It was past my bedtime, so I couldn't know.
We forgot João is a child and he's has an early bedtime.
Yes, by 6.
Let me jump in here and introduce a little bit of the context today. Pretty much, I outlined it at the beginning already. You want to have two things in place, especially when you are a Swiss company or even maybe a Swiss AI engineering agency and you're about to implement AI solutions. These are cost, but also metrics. And maybe probably 1 year ago, I was initiating some discussions already on this topic around the metrics. So maybe let's start with that, gentlemen. First, how would you just understand generally what a metric is and why do we need that in the first place? Maybe just very high level, and then we can talk about a few metrics you might put in place, especially if you're, for example, signing a contract or you're having an ongoing project regarding AI, chatbots, agents, and so on. Maybe let's start with you, Bene. First.
To sum up, a metric is a way to evaluate the model. You have several ways to evaluate, and a metric actually does that. It's for you before going to production or even during production live. You can measure how well your bot is performing. And going a bit more into it, we do have, it's mainly for RAG purposes, because for other behaviors you can kind of design some flows to measure the behavior and the expected. But let's focus here on the RAG because I think this is the one that gets more evaluation metrics because there's more steps towards it. For instance, you can evaluate the correctness of the answer. It's basically the response and the reference answer. You have the relevance. It's you evaluating the response based on the user input. You have the groundedness. It's evaluating the response based on the retrieved document. And then you have the retrieval that you're evaluating the retrieved documents and the input. Most of the basic metric that I think it's fairly easy and implemented, I think, in some projects already is kind of the relevance, I would say. They kind of try to do a mix between the correctness and the relevance of the answer. I think it steers more if you're implementing that metric because it's a LLM. You try to evaluate more towards the relevance than the correctness. For the correctness, we were talking about this earlier. Maybe you should use the cosine because it's kind of cheaper. Because with these evaluators, you're using a LLM to judge the answer. And with the other ones, it's more or less stable and measure has been used for a longer time than these LLM evaluators. This is fairly new in the AI world because LLMs are fairly new. This, just to add, these evaluators, we do have some references. This is going to be in the links in the description. And also, LangChain implemented more metrics. There is the criteria, and you have several ways. Most of them aren't used in production because this is more to analyze the bot behavior before, not during. But during, we have these metrics that I just said. João, you seem eager to add.
There's this interesting thing that most projects that people are developing are not getting into production. So there's reports from, I think, one of the big 4 consultancy companies, and we'll link it later. And it was saying basically that there's a lot of companies developing AI products, but because these metrics are not in place, because the technology is relatively new, the developers themselves are not trained specifically for this. And so a lot of these projects are failing. And so here's like even if you had a website and it had nothing to do with AI, just a simple website for your company, some contact information and the name of it, you'd still have some metrics there. You'd still have how fast does the website load, and or for example, how online is it? So the uptime. In a year, was it down half a minute? Was it down a few hours or a few days? And you'd measure that across years, across months to see is your website working correctly. And this is like the most basic website possible. So for AI projects that are really complicated, you also have equally complicated metrics. And it's important, like Bene was saying, people usually go like, they choose one metric and they go by it. Thing is, you have multiple steps and you probably want to see how each step is doing. Otherwise, imagine if you have a website and you're only measuring how online it is and you're not measuring how fast it is. Well, then your website could be really slow, like 10 seconds to load. No one wants to wait that long. Of the people logged into your website close it and open Instagram instead. But hey, it was online, so it's fine. It's 100% online for you. And in terms of these kinds of bots, you try to measure the documents that you're searching for. So are you getting the right documents? Like the context retrieval. Are you being able to read those documents correctly and get information out of them? So usually show, let's say, the equivalent of like 7 different PDFs to your LLM, hoping that it'll get the right answer for the question. Is it actually getting the right answer? And is it answering correctly? So there's a lot of different steps usually in these bots, especially if you go into multi-agent frameworks, a lot of different complicated behaviors, like it has to interact with your CRM, it has to send emails on your behalf. If everything was done right, you test each and every single component of it so you know what's working.
There's something I didn't add there because I was just thinking a bit more in the perspective of LangChain, but in real time in project as well, you also want to implement some metric that I don't think it's very widely spoken. It's the stability, because the model answers, it varies because it's not something fixed. It's supposed to be dynamic. And that's why it's so pretty and so beautiful to implement these solutions, because you're not getting the same static answer. You're getting customized answer based on your query, maybe in the client attributes, but with the source truth. But because you have this dynamic, you do also need to evaluate the stability of the answers, because it varies and because all the other components can vary as well, because the input of the customer varies. You want to measure the stability, and for that you kind of need a way to do that as well. So, and this can
could be
add
running,
to the
you could be running that same question 10 times and get 10 different answers, and maybe changing just a word or two, but maybe at least like a couple times out of those 10, the answer is completely different and it's not really correct. So
and the behavior might change. So
yeah.
you do need sometimes to measure that. And I think, I don't know if you already measured, Cyril, this is the second part of the podcast that we want to talk about. It's the cost. And all of this, because most of these metrics are using LLM to evaluate as well, you're adding more to the cost. And this is something to be aware. But again, this is a cost that you want and you need to have. Otherwise, the solution is not going to production. And if it goes, you don't know how to measure. You don't know how well it goes. As João said, you don't have a clue if you don't have these metrics.
I mean, it's
and
maybe a perfect time. I can quickly just zoom out. Like we kind of head started a little bit already into the different metrics itself. But from my perspective, I think to have metrics is heavily important, especially if you're an outside, let's say, consulting agency, or you're an AI engineering or AI agent engineering agency, whatever it is. You do not want to be in a situation, just from my own understanding, for example, that you implement a solution and then you kind of spend 3, 4, 5, or 6 months into building it, and the client of yours is basically just saying, well, it doesn't really feel right, or the answer is not really sufficient for us, but then you don't really have any metrics, again, to be having a counter argument. So I think it's truly important, especially if you're having, let's say, initiation of let's say, an exploratory project for like maybe a week or two, and you're trying to maybe just show up an MVP or a prototype, and from there you're trying to upsell future services. In both of these packages, initially, but then also in the actual project, you define metrics for you to hit. If you don't hit them, for example, cosine similarity, it's just like a, let's say, more or less statistical test, very simple. You can just look at some similarity. A high number is pretty good. Above, I think, 85, 0.85, 0.9 is pretty good. 0.95 is excellent, and 1 is too much, probably. And everything below might be in order to be improved. But you have these metrics in place, maybe even in your contract, and then you can actually go deliver the project, and you have something to defend yourself. Or any other metric that Bene and Joao, you both just perfectly mentioned. Yeah, I think it's wise to have this sometimes even in the contract, to again avoid that a client of yours is basically just saying it doesn't really feel right when the chatbot is giving some response. I don't know how you,
and for you
guys
as a
think
client
about that
as well. And for you as a client, yeah, it's important.
You can't sell projects on vibes. You can convince people on the projects, and if the vibe's right, but when money is involved and contracts are involved, you can't really add a clause to a contract saying, well, the vibe of the solution is just really, really good. Because I know that there's a lot of young lawyers out there, but I think none of them would agree to such a clause.
Yeah, but the problem is, like, why do we even need this? Like, why is this a vibe problem? Because the LLM is statistically not the same answer every time. So we need to have some sort of metrics that helps us navigate this, let's say, manner that sometimes it's an answer X, sometimes it's an answer X and a little bit extra on the left and on the right. So you would want to have some metric that helps you to, even it's statistically like sometimes different, you want to have a metric again that helps you to say it's pretty good on the margins even, and on in general basically. How do you guys think about these metrics in the, let's say, probabilistic manner of artificial intelligence? Because again, we need them because of that basically.
I think it's hard to focus on like very specific numbers, because in 10 different questions, or in the 10 of the same question, you're going to get 10 slightly different answers. And that's okay, that's to be expected, but you still, there's a way to measure them. If they go along the same direction, are they still correct answers, even though some words may change, or are a few of them completely wrong? And you can measure that, and you can measure all the components leading up to that. Did you get the right text every single time? If the person is asking about how to take vacations, what's the HR policy of your company? Were you getting the 2015's earning report? Because that's probably not the right document to search for things. Or vice versa. Like someone was asking, what was your profit in 2016? And maybe you need to look at those documents. Every single time there's a question, there's a lot of different steps involved. And if you can get all the right steps working pretty much in a stable manner, so if they work 99% of the time, then you can rest assured that you have a bot that works and is pretty has stability. But then a way to do this is usually you have some sort of expected behavior. So if it's your solution is based around replying to questions, let's say around your company, and you want it to be an internal tool that your employees can use to find out about your company's behaviors and methods, right? Because no one reads all the pages and documentation that a company has. By the time they actually get to read it, it's too much information, and they just want to have one simple answer. And so you can have that kind of tool. But if you want to have a kind of tool that works, then you'd have let's say 50 or 100 questions that can be answered by your documentation. And you can run those tests multiple times and see if the number stays roughly the same. Is the bot always replying right to 70% of them? Or is it right sometimes half the time, but sometimes 90% of the time? And it can give you pretty good results. And that's something you can then have contracts rely upon, because those are hard metrics that you can put on a graph, make it look pretty, and put it on a report, so you can convince people and shareholders that your project is actually worth it. Otherwise,
that's the issue, right?
A lot of money.
Like pre-AI, you just implemented something and you moved on, and it kind of worked. Like you have some user acceptance test, or generally like you tested it pretty like yes or no kind of pass or fail type. But now it's a bit more like a little pass, a little fail. So you would want to have maybe some different mechanisms again that you avoid having clawed back or something by your client. Sorry, Bene, go on.
No worries. I think for these metrics are really a big part of an AI project, and I think people sometimes overestimate this or underestimate. And I think it's underestimate. Yeah, that's the correct word.
Which estimation is it, over or
underestimate?
Underestimate. Okay.
Yeah, because with these evaluators, for instance, the answer relevance and correctness, I think this is more of a pre-production kind of a thing. But for instance, the other two, I would say the groundness groundedness and the retrieval relevance, this could go before production and after production, because with this you can kind of measure if the bot is hallucinating. And this is a big thing from business. And if you want the accurate answer, and depending on how sensitive your business is, you do want to have these metrics from the get-go. And they're used not only that, but during the development, they can pinpoint you some pain points on your project. If it's the groundness or the retrieval, maybe you need to optimize or change the embedding models, or maybe even using a good embedding model. Depending on your business, it's actually good to maybe fine-tune it, because that can increase the extraction, the quality of them by a lot. I was kind of doing a few years ago a project for legal purposes, and these embedding models they're very generic, but they're not good for legal wording because the proximity is too much. So you kind of need to fine-tune, to improve, to make it the similarity to be bigger, so it's to have a better match on the wording.
Can you maybe double click on this, Bene? Like embedding model, like very, very briefly, maybe there's some listeners in the audience that are maybe not on the embedding level. Maybe they're up leveling LLM embedding. What's the difference? Maybe why would you need one?
Embedding models on a high level is converting your natural language to numbers, to a vectorial space. So then later that can be compared to other wordings. And embedding is also transforming the wording to tokens to be into an input parameter for the model to work.
Maybe that it's not sounds the best. Really complicated.
Yeah.
The exact same thing, but an example would be you try to convert words into numbers, basically so you can compare them. Because if you're trying to compare cats and dogs, for example, like the word cat, the word dog, how would you go about it? You know what a cat is, you know what a dog is, you know they're both animals, so it's kind of similar, but still different animals. They're more similar to themselves than, for example, to a table. And so a way to do this is convert these words to numbers, like to a bunch of numbers, and it can be like 10 numbers, it can be 1024 numbers for a given word. It's just something that the computer can use to compare them. And there's obviously a lot of math behind it. We're not going to go into it, otherwise it would be a very different kind of podcast. But the idea is, if you have a word, you can easily convert it into a number, and the same word should be always the same number, and a very similar word should result in a similar number. Or in this case, numbers. We call them vectors. It's basically just an array or a set of numbers.
I did a quick search, LE5. If you could draw every word, picture, or sound on a giant map, embedding models help you put them in the right place so that the related things are close together. So,
exactly.
Sorry for my deep dive. I think it's better explanation. Sometimes I'm not the best. Anyhow.
Yeah, but this is really important because we're talking about your employee asking about your HR policy and the other employee asking about your earnings report in 2016. So searching over your documents is kind of important part in this. In your HR question, you want to get HR documents. In your earnings report, you're going to get financial documents. And to do this properly, what you have is your documents are usually text. There can be many things. You can always convert them to text. And so your documents have embeddings. So they're being converted into these sets of numbers. And then you can compare those sets of numbers to the sets of numbers of your user's question. And if everything works out right, if you use the right embedding models, if you split up everything correctly, then the person asking about HR policy, the closest match and the best results should be the HR documents. Of course, there's a lot of complexity in this. There's a lot of different ways to go about this, which also differs in how your documents are set up. Is it all PDFs? Is it a bunch of different websites? You can combine different sources if you want. And it's so important, I think we mentioned a couple of episodes ago, that OpenAI has this, right? So for in your chatbot, if you're searching for something, it has something called web search. And search, most like even Google, what they're doing is mostly this. For any given query that you have, they're gonna try to get like the best website, the best possible match, so you can always find your information. So even if you search like that weird movie you saw in 2005 with a man in a hat, and you just say movie 2005 man with a hat, and you're probably gonna find it. And so there's a lot of PhD people and experts on this, and it's $1 billion algorithm that Google has, and everyone wants to have their own version of it because it really helps in these kinds of projects. So OpenAI was trying to do a contract with Google to see if they could let them use basically Google's API. They say, hey, I will pay you, but let's help, allow us to put ChatGPT to use Google. And I don't think Google agreed to that yet, at least not publicly, but they were in discussings and doing deals because, of course, there's a lot of money involved in this. For your local project, you're not doing Google, but you're trying to emulate a version of that.
Maybe if I can jump in here quickly. I mean, I think the core notion is you can choose an embedding model freely based on the project. And that's also something maybe worth mentioning. It's not that there's only one out there and that's kind of as good as it gets. There's always these components. You can choose different embedding models. Bene, you mentioned it, even fine-tuning them for particular purposes. You might be wanting, again, to be choosing particular matrices. We talked about that for different purposes, maybe internal project purposes prior to production, so go live, and maybe post-production, go live. You would want to have maybe track them ongoingly if a new LLM is coming out, maybe, and you would want to have different metrics. And well, lastly, again, if you're an outside consultant or an outside AI automation or agency, you would maybe want them in the contract for you to be some sort of having a safe net if the customer, again, is feeling the vibe of the chatbot is not good enough. So maybe that's kind of a high-level summary. Gentlemen, let's maybe shift gear a little bit into the context of cost. Maybe I give you back the word very briefly, high level. What costs maybe do project regarding AI need to be considered, like maybe on just on a high level? What are particular cost areas?
So in the same, all kinds of software projects have the cost of infrastructure. So if you have a website, it has to be on a server. It could be in your bedroom server. It could be an actual cloud server. Usually we advise people to use the cloud. It's made for that. And it's a lot safer than have it a computer running in your house. It could go up in flames. So there's a cost of infrastructure that you have to pay for databases, for compute power, for connections, and for basically the bandwidth that you're using in the cloud. But that's the same in all projects, so that's nothing new in GenAI too. Thing is, the one thing that is new in GenAI is you don't pay for the hosting service for GenAI models. You pay for the use. So someone else is usually hosting the model for you, and you pay as much as you use them. So if you don't use it at all, you pay €0 or 0 francs or $0, and the more you use, the more you'll pay, which makes it for a really linear scaling system, and it makes it for a really low upfront cost. So you don't have to go out and actually reserve computing power. You don't have to buy in some credits. You can literally just spend as much as you want or as much as you use, which also makes it a problem for how much are you scaling. So if it's an internal tool, basically your company might have 100 so employees, and of those 100 employees, I'd say maybe half of them is using the tool daily. So that project, even if it has a lot of steps and a lot of GenAI involved, it won't cost you up into thousands. It'll be a few €100 per month, if that much. It really depends on how much you use and how it is set up. Again, we talked about this in the past, and it's still an ongoing issue, is that computing power is expensive, but also different models have different prices. And so you can go for OpenAI and use the models behind ChatGPT because you're familiar with them, but also you're paying a little bit of premium on that price because they're a known company and they're really good models and they're really big too. If you go something for Gemini from Google, really good models too, but a lot cheaper. And I think the coefficient of the performance for the price changes a lot, and then it changes according to what you want it to do. And so those costs that you pay for the inference that go up as much as you use them also change according to the models that you use them and how much you're using them. There's a lot of different factors that change it, but you can have an idea that internal tools and little projects and smaller projects cost you tens or $100, and projects that have a public-facing chatbot or a public-facing website that has AI that can be used by thousands or millions of users, that will cost you millions or billions of dollars. That's why ChatGPT, which is a very public, very famous chatbot right now, it costs them billions of dollars monthly to keep it running. And we talked about is that people saying thank you, well, it's polite, but it's still using the chatbot, so it's costing OpenAI money just to reply to those messages. I think it gives you an overall view on how the cost goes and how linear it is.
No, I mean, also for them, I mean, it's a cost function as well, like for OpenAI or AWS, all these hyperscalers. I mean, they're basically trying to make profit. They do have some sort of margin. And some models, as we've seen with OpenAI, for example, they're pricing it at a particular point, but then they're maybe even losing money because the actual operational cost, meaning the data centers and nowadays also electricity, getting all these chips in and build, etc., is running and costing more than the actual end user is paying. Anything to add from your side in regard to cost, maybe some different perspectives? I think just to sum up what Joe was mentioning, there is an on-demand as opposed to a fixed cost structure, something that you have to take into consideration when building. Of course, depending on the model you're using, you have different token costs. You can think about that like as a ticket, basically. Some are more and less expensive. What else? You want to add into the mix?
Regarding for me, let's go for a Gen AI project. You have the setup cost and the monthly cost. Normally, it's higher than the traditional projects. And a different thing that wasn't mentioned as well is the talent that you need to develop this product. It's more expensive. Let's be honest.
I was just going to say that. That's probably the intangible one we haven't.
Yeah. But here, a comparison for this. I think we already talked about this POC, a tender analysis POC. For instance, a traditional setup would be 20K, the app, the rules, the engine with the forms, and probably around 500 to 1,000 euros monthly with some updates. But then it would take 2 to 4 hours to analyze each tender, 2 or 3 people working on that, and it would take years for you to achieve a ROI, a break even. But the Gen AI setup cost, it would I'm throwing around 60K. The setup monthly cost would be a bit higher, 3 to 5. But then instead of spending 2 to 4 hours analyzing each tender, 2 to 5 minutes analyzing with Gen AI. You would probably not need an analyst, but then you could just have one and imagine the amount of tender that he could go through. And to achieve the ROI, the break even, within 6 months to less than a year, you would achieve that. That's why, again, this is the year, because I believe the Gen AI already achieved maturity for production level. And for this kind of product to be in production, you need, again, all the metrics that we already talked in the beginning of the project to make sure you don't overspend your budget and it's contained within the limits that you set. That's why you need these metrics. And then it's a higher cost than the traditional project, but way higher returns and faster returns. Depending on how well this is developed, some modules can be reused to other areas of your company.
I mean, it's a really good point. I just believe the core comparison sometimes with the cost, as you both perfectly mentioned, is unfortunately sometimes the salary, right? So you mentioned an analyst. You mentioned an analyst in different domains. Could be private equity, could be in investing, could be in banking, compliance analyst, or even a procurement or tender analyst. And then you would basically benchmark or cross-compare one of the analyst's salary, and you try to just downscale that to an AI system. If the AI system is, say, 10 times cheaper running it and building it, then you maybe have a profitable ROI on potentially might have a profitable ROI if it's possible. I just maybe on that notion, I think like 1.5 years ago or 1 year ago, Klarna, which is I would just put maybe the article here on the screen. It's a famous company, and they were basically mentioning, hey, we now have no customer support anymore. It's all running on AI. So that was like the announcement, I think, 1 year ago. And now they're scaling a little bit back in the sense that they're rehiring human agents and they're better orchestrating human to AI, let's say, handing off particular tasks. I don't know how you guys think about that. Like, are we already at the stage, Bene, you teased it a little bit that we are, but are we already at the stage where we can replace actually educated professionals, or we're still in the augmenting phase? At least the case of Klarna says otherwise currently.
I think we're at a stage of augmenting. We're slowly rolling into replacing, and there's a lot of advantage into fully replacing. Like the cost benefits of that are tremendous. However, if you're seeing a project rolling out around this time, it means it started production quite a while ago. And quite a while ago, let's say a year ago, the models were still not the same that we have today. They were not as good as today. And the technology overall was not as stable as the one that we have it nowadays. And so it's very important that if you have a development team working with you, that dev team has been keeping track of technology, has been listening to some amazing podcasts talking about AI in Switzerland, and all kinds of different news outlets so that they can actually keep updating your system. So if you're using today's technology, you can, but today's projects are usually using last year's technology, and I don't think that was fully in place to replace a human just yet. But I think we're rolling into it, and it's going to be really interesting because there's a lot of big CEOs, including Microsoft and Amazon, that want, for example, their code to be written by AI. Because one of the major costs they have is hiring developers and engineers. And I get it, it's an expensive process. You have a lot of turnover, but you also have run the risk of not having working code or not having working infrastructure because the AI might not be as good as your engineers. So it's going to be a gradual phasing out process, I believe.
Let me provocatively ask you. Yeah.
I just have a point to add there. They say, I think Matt already said, I might be wrong. Sorry, fact check this. They said 30% of their code is already AI generated.
It was Microsoft, yeah, I think.
That's why sometimes we have been having these major blackouts with these companies because it's not very mature yet.
Important to note, Satya said this is only for greenfield projects. So
Okay.
I think sometimes people get this, I mean, sometimes me too, I get it wrong, but in the sense that you can write great AI code, but only from scratch. But if it's in an existing very large code base, I don't believe it's 30%. I don't know, but that's just my opinion. I don't know, you guys maybe disagree.
Thank
with
you
me.
for the fact check. You can continue, sir.
On the
Sorry to
fly,
interrupt.
Ben, always. Let me ask one provocative question. Like, how augmented do you feel by AI currently, from 1 to 100? Give me some sort of
100.
number. 100, you feel already, because Joao mentioned the case. Now we're in the augmenting phase, basically, of AI and not replacing it. So let's give it a quick assessment of how augmented we feel, and then I have a bit of a story I can throw into the mix here.
I think right now we got to a place that we're constantly putting it to do things that we don't want to do and that are boring or repetitive. So for example, if I'm writing unit tests, I can have unit tests written out by AI because this has to look at the function that's writing unit tests for. So I can have some of the repetitive and boring code written by AI, but then I can actually review it way faster than I could write it, and have it be a part of my code base. So I think it's augmenting me quite a bit. Even in areas of my personal life, it's speeding up things that otherwise would take days, and I'd have to have a quick chat with Gemini or ChatGPT to figure it out. So I think it makes the case that it's a really cost-effective solution if you have a company to get this kind of AI tools to your employees. Because sometimes the licenses are quite a bit expensive, but the productivity that you get is quite, I think, rewarding for the price that you pay. The same thing happened with coffee a few years ago, that companies were realizing that
you mentioned that the other day.
If they paid for coffee, they would get the same amount of productivity back. So I think we're at that stage now.
Joao, what's your number from 1 to 100? How augmented? Is it 50, 60, 90
92.
already?
Mostly just to disagree with Bene. I don't want to say 100. But I would say around 92%.
That's a lot. Because, I mean, we can do that like every 10 episodes. Now we're approaching our 10th episode. So every 2.5 months, we basically can reassess and re-underwrite this number because it's an exponential curve anyway. Bene, what's your number and take
already said.
How much did you say?
I said 100.
100%. Okay. I'm definitely.
There's already 2 Benes out there.
Also from my end, I think I just had some personal experience once again with ChatGPT. I had a surgery, I told you guys last week, and every single day I was talking to ChatGPT, like every day. And it was really good. It was really like an uplifting experience because, you have a surgery, you don't really know what the hell is going on, how much painkillers you should take, how long does it last, all this back in the days, I was just going to Google and clicking myself through 99 blue links. And this time, every single day, I was like checked in by this AI thing. It's like, how do you feel today? Please, do this. Don't walk too much. Do that. You can take ibuprofen. All these details. And I felt this is insane. And I think after 4 days, I was asking how long does this thing last? What should I expect after the next few days? And it was perfectly, almost to the day, like forecasting when the pain goes away, what type of medication I should take, when I should walk, when I should not walk, what I should do, like all these things. It was just like, I don't know if you've had a medical kind of experience with ChatGPT, but for me, it was like really, really mind blowing. It knew everything about me. It was like 2 days ago, you told me that. And yeah, so that's kind of, I think, show for you, it was on the movement it helped, like moving your house.
Yeah, like and how to move things and like how to set up a dishwasher, but even medical things. There's some things I was worried about. I searched it up. If I went on WebMD or like the traditional Googling ways,
Yeah,
I'll go with cancer. Everything ends up being cancer, or like one of those 1 in a million.
Fortunately, it's like
Yeah.
reversal to that.
There's a story about that too, the cancer thing. I shared with you guys earlier. Like there was this lady over a year ago. She was chatting with ChatGPT. She was diagnosed by ChatGPT with blood cancer. Only 1 year, and she disregarded the ChatGPT evaluation. And basically, 1 year after the medicals, they said, "Okay, you do have blood cancer." And we can add this to the sources too. Sorry, João, you can continue.
That's the thing. If I was on Google, I would probably think it's cancer. But ChatGPT was like, actually, that's a very common thing. You just have to do this and that solved. It was a very easy solution, very easy that diagnostic. You can also double check it and go online and see that it actually matches your symptoms. And you can ask your doctor, please do not take medical advice from your favorite AI podcast. But it's a lot cheaper and a lot more time effective than going to the doctor. I'll spend probably 2 hours in transit, waiting for a line, talking to the doctor, and getting a report back to tell me the same thing I got from ChatGPT in 2 minutes.
I mean, this is kind of the thing, right? That there was this inference, or like I think 1 year ago or something, I saw like how long does it take for particular job functions to be augmented / replaced by AI? And back then it was medical was fairly straight, like top 5 ranked. Until basically last week, I didn't really have an exposure to that experience, but now that I do, I certainly feel this is really crazy, especially with the memory ChatGPT has now. Like it can like understand everything that I have, like maybe months ago, maybe years later now, it may maybe remind myself that I had this surgery kind of. So this is really, really fascinating stuff. Gentlemen, anything else before we wrap up? Today we talked about metrics, quality, the augmenting phase of artificial intelligence. We talked about this token loading. Now it's really going bananas. Microsoft and Google mentioned it in their annual reports. The cloud is going really, really skyrocketing. So many people are using AI. This is the year for it to be used. Bene, João, any other thing to add?
I do just one small thing. I already use ChatGPT and I really get a really nice experience also with image generation with both. I think over a month ago, I was planning on getting a tattoo, and basically,
remember you showed me some henna or whatever.
So basically, ChatGPT, I told more or less about the idea of the tattoo that I wanted. I shared some references, and then it generated so many. I could pick, I could choose, I could try to adjust, and it adjusted the tattoo, and then it gave me all the basis for how to behave, what to do, what not to do. And I think it's a nice experience to have.
Did you get a final tattoo suggestion?
Of like what the development has been? I tried the exact same thing a year ago. It was terrible. Mostly because the image generation models were still quite new. I mean, they could make funny dogs, but that's mostly it. And if I asked for a tattoo, then I would get a weird looking arm, many fingers, and no real tattoo. And now, as Ben is saying, that's working. And that's working very good. So it's surprising.
Your pictures customized.
Maybe next time we can put an AI pic on it. Great. All right, gentlemen. Time to wrap up. I would say episode number 9. Next time we have the 10th episode. We were already saying at the very beginning, this is our first milestone. Maybe let's plan a giveaway or something. If you're dropping a comment, we hopefully can send you one of these hats that Bene is owning currently. But with all seriousness, we're uploading these episodes every single week. We really try to shine light on, let's say, sometimes the underlooked areas in artificial intelligence development, coming from AI engineers, experts building in the field. And yeah, see you maybe in the next episode, already in a few days. This week we're a little bit late. Next time we load up on Friday. Gentlemen, thank you for coming and see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.